Hello, and welcome to Shaking and Sipping. This is the show where we shake up or somehow combine a cocktail or other mixed drink, have a sip, talk a bit about its history and some variants, and see how it is. We're continuing our quest to work through the IBA's list of official cocktails to see how those stack up. We're in the second section, the contemporary classics, and this week's classic is the champagne cocktail. Now, one thing to note here, which I think is interesting, is for the second week in a row, we have a drink in this second section that feels like it should be in the first, right? So the first section was largely drinks from the 19th and early 20th century, with some drinks being as late as the 30s at least, if not later. Both last week's caipirinha and this week's champagne cocktail are drinks which almost certainly go back to the 19th century. In the case of the champagne cocktail, certainly back to the 19th century. So I'm not entirely sure why both of those have made it into this section, if it's just that IBA feels that they're less popular than some of the drinks in the Unforgettables, but it just seems weird to me, so just had to mention it. So the champagne cocktail is a drink that in many ways we've made before, because it is what it says on the tin. It is a cocktail made with champagne. So essentially you could mix this up just like you would an old-fashioned, which of course we've done an episode on, and just sub your base for champagne, and that would be it. And that's pretty much how the original version of this was made, which is one we will make today. The champagne cocktail is likely the very first thing to be called a cocktail, which varies widely from the idea of a cocktail, in that there is no base spirit. We're using champagne, or as they just would have called it at the time, probably wine, because it would have been obvious what sort of wine one meant in this case. So obviously today, cocktail is a term that means nothing and applies to any mixed drink, and also there are drinks with names that don't include cocktail in the title, which are by all rights a cocktail. This is probably the first drink to do that in one direction or another, at least that we still know of today. Champagne cocktail goes back to at least 1850. That's our earliest report of it. It shows up in San Francisco. And apparently at the time, California and San Francisco, especially the Gold Rush area, was just going mad for champagne. It said that more champagne was drunk in sort of that area of California than in all of the East Coast states combined. And so this is a drink that's in Jerry Thomas's Bon Vivant's Companion, the first real bartender book, which we've talked about several times. At his bar, he was sometimes ordering champagne, thousands of bottles at a time. He kept at least 7 brands on hand at all time, largely for cocktails, though also some was just drank, as is obviously. And so we'll be using one of those brands today that Jerry Thomas used to keep in his bar back in the mid-19th century. So what this drink is, like I said, just an old-fashioned made with champagne. Now there were a few changes along the way to how it was constructed and a few other ingredients potentially added. And so we'll cover that as we go today, but we're just going to make sort of 2 versions. We're going to make a very original spec to sort of Jerry Thomas's recipe, and then we will make the IBA spec with a few little tweaks to it to see how the drink has evolved. The other thing running in our IBA trend, I've mentioned in several episodes that we're sort of focusing on a lot of breakfast drinks at the moment. The IBA is trying to get us to booze as early as possible in the day, and this one is no exception. This drink, from its inception, was absolutely viewed as an eye-opener. And so whilst people would certainly drink them throughout the day, and indeed if you were sort of a rich layabout playboy sort of person, you would be sort of expected to just drink champagne the entire day long. But this drink especially was considered the proper way to start the morning. And so I will read from Imbibe, the great David Wondrich book, which I used to mention every episode just about. This is a poem written in 1859 to the champagne cocktail. This is just one of its 11 stanzas. And the morn shall be filled with cocktail, and the cares of the early day, like disappointed collectors, shall silently slip away. So hopefully our cares will slip away, though I'm not quite drinking this in the morning. All right, so for the first version of the drink, we're basically just building an old-fashioned of sorts here. We're going to start off with half a teaspoon, a partial bar spoon, whatever you want to taste, of sugar. That's what I want. It should be noted, this drink would have been incredibly sweet back in the day. So obviously there's a little bit of sugar added, and some people added more or less, but champagne at the time was incredibly sweet. So what we think of now as a pretty sweet champagne, a demi-sec, or maybe even a little bit sweeter, would have been the absolute driest champagne you could get at the time. So champagne at the time plus sugar, this would have been, I don't even know how sweet, too sweet, but just bear that in mind. And then to that, we're going to add a couple dashes of Angostura Bitters. This did, at some point later, become popular with Peychaud's bitters, and I think that's a great choice here, but I'm just going to stick with Ango. Then I'm going to crack an ice cube into here. Over time, it became popular to just switch to one large ice cube, like a lump of ice in the drink. But in the early versions, it was always cracked, and these were drinks that were pretty much slammed down. Then we need a piece of lemon peel. Which I'm going to just go ahead and express a bit, but it's going to get mixed up with the drink. And then we need our champagne. We are going to use Veuve Clicquot Brut. Like I said, this is much drier than would have been to taste at the time. But it's something that I would prefer, and I'm the one drinking these. Now, as this drink is mostly champagne, that is our largest flavor here. So you do want to use something that you like, right? Now, this might not be a place to pull out some multi-$100 vintage, Dom Perignon or something. But at the same time, if you make this with $6 sparkling wine product, it's gonna taste like $6 sparkling wine product at the end. So I would choose maybe not the most expensive thing you can get, but choose something that you really enjoy drinking as is, because that's largely what this is going to taste like. You could certainly make it with things that aren't champagne, with other sparkling wines, with Prosecco or a Cava or whatever is to your taste, but choose something that you like anyway. Then there's no real measurement on this. We just want however much we want. Early recipes say that you'd get somewhere between 4 to 6 drinks from a bottle. So that gives you an idea of where you're going here, but just make it to however much you want in your drink. I think that's going to be a good amount. And then the early recipes say to shake this. Now, obviously, if you were to put this into regular shaker tins and shake, you'd have a problem. It's very carbonated. Your shaker is going to burst. What they mean in these early recipes is to pour it. So to do like a flip preparation between multiple vessels. Again, with the cracked ice in here, that's going to increase dilution, which isn't great, and we're going to lose our carbonation pretty quickly. But this drink was meant to be kind of slammed down, so that was considered okay at the time. Let's go ahead and mix it. At the time, they probably would have done that with a bit more flair, sort of Blue Blazer style, but I don't see any need to do so. And that is it. This is an 1850-ish champagne cocktail. So the nose is mostly champagne. I'm getting a bit of that lemon just because I expressed it, and I probably hit the sides of the glass with it a little bit, such that that's coming through. But it mostly smells slightly yeasty, slightly fruity, champagne adjacent. Yeah, and so I know this champagne pretty well. It tastes a lot like that, except there's just a little bit of width, and then a little bit of the bitters comes mid-palate. So mid-palate, I get this darker note, which is the bitters. It's a little bit bitter, but it's also a little bit, dark roasty sort of place. It's lovely. Is it better than just the champagne on its own? Not really. It's certainly a little bit less dry, and you could add more sugar, and again, back then they probably would have, in addition to starting with a sweeter champagne. If it were too much sweeter, I certainly wouldn't enjoy it as much. Though it is a morning drink again, and I do have oddly a very strong sweet tooth sort of when I wake up. So perhaps if I was going to reach for a glass of champagne at 7 this morning when I awoke, maybe I would have wanted it sweeter. Yeah, it's very good. I think obviously the mixing method is a bit problematic. It has already lost a large portion of its effervescence. There is still some that I can feel on my tongue, but it's not really expressing itself in that way. It's tasty though. So over the years that the champagne cocktail sat around, people did innovate on it a bit, or maybe un-innovate on it, I suppose. One of the most common changes was to add some cognac to it. So we know at least by 1898, we have a source, a mixologist called Haywood in Delaware, I believe, who was reported to add about an ounce of brandy, which would have been cognac, to the drink at that time. It's quite possible it happened before then as well. The question is whether that's really an evolution of this cocktail, or if at that point you're making sort of a brandy old-fashioned that you're adding champagne to. I don't know, but he called it a champagne cocktail, and that is in the IBA to this day. Not that amount. An ounce of cognac, I think, is crazy. That totally takes over the drink, but adding some, and so that's still in it today. The other thing that became popular in this time was rather than having sugar come in like loaf sugar that you had to shave down, or the advent of actual granular like caster sugar, sugar cubes became a popular thing. And obviously we see this a lot in old fashioned today. A lot of people start it with a bittered cube and then go ahead and muddle that. This became very popular, and over time, as we switched to this, people also started liking drier champagnes. It's also in the last decade or so of the 19th century that champagnes that we would now consider to be, a normal level of sweetness, maybe not quite some of the, most bone dry varietals, but certainly something approaching what we would see as a Brut or a Sec, became very popular. And so with that came the idea of adding less sugar as well. However, you still had to add sugar to turn it into a cocktail, and the sugar offers cavitation points, spots for the bubbles to emerge. So what became common is to use a whole sugar cube left in the drink that you would then see a stream of bubbles emerge from. So let's do it that way. I'm going to go ahead and do this in a flute. The IBA's instructions say a large champagne glass, which is a weird term that doesn't really mean anything to me. Obviously, coupes were the original champagne glasses. Flutes are probably more common now. I don't know what they mean by large exactly, and in their picture they use a coupe, but I don't think that makes sense for this drink, because the effect of what we want from that sugar cube hanging out at the bottom. I think a flute works better unless you have sort of a round-bottomed layered coupe, sort of like a small margarita glass. Might work well there, but we're going to go flute today. So we're going to add our sugar cube. To that, we're going to add a couple of dashes of bitters. That's probably a little bit more than you need, strictly speaking, but who doesn't like bitters? And to that, we're going to add 10 milliliters, or 1/3 of an ounce, of cognac. We're using Pierre Ferrand 1840, as we, I think, always do. I think every episode we've used cognac, we use Pierre Ferrand. It's a great product. And then this is going to be made in the modern method, so we're just going to add the champagne and nothing else. We're not going to stir, we're not going to shake, nothing. And IBA does give a volume here. They want 90 milliliters, or about 3 ounces. I am not going to bother measuring. I'm just going to go ahead and pour some. So we have some nice bubbling happening, beautiful color from the bitters. We see that sugar cube releasing a nice stream of bubbles there. A little bit of color in the foam from some of the bitters that it's grabbed on its way. And the IBA, of course, wants a garnish here that I don't really feel is necessary, but, you know, we'll do it. That garnish is going to be an orange peel and maraschino cherry. Put that in the drink right there on the side for aroma or something. And this is the IBA spec champagne cocktail. So nose, obviously I'm getting a ton of orange because it's sitting right there. And then again, a little bit of the sort of yeastiness of the champagne. So obviously very similar to the last one. There's definitely less dilution. I'm getting a little bit more bitters. I'm also getting the champagne's yeastier notes, the deeper notes, a little bit more. I'm still getting a little bit of the fruitiness, a little bit of those sort of unripe fruits, but I'm getting more of the body. Got a lot more effervescence going on. Little bit less sweet, honestly. I didn't put that much sugar in the first one, so this is dissolving more slowly, but it is dissolving, and I didn't add that much the first time, so similar dryness level, and we'll certainly approach. This will be sweeter by the time that sugar cube dissolves than the last one was. I think it's delicious. I support it. Now, the one other change we want to try is IBA has in its ingredients list, optional, a couple dashes of Grand Marnier. Now, I can't find a note to this really anywhere else. I didn't search that hard, but in the multiple write-ups of the history of this drink that I read, no one mentioned adding Grand Marnier to this drink. Now, where I think this is coming from is obviously we've talked before about fancy cocktails, which were basically an old-fashioned that had a bit of curacao in it. So I think the idea here is just what if you made a champagne cocktail fancy? And then the further thinking is, well, instead of curacao, let's use Grand Marnier since it is mostly cognac. That's going to play with the cognac that we've added to this. And so we'll see how that kind of goes. And Grand Marnier is very sticky, and their bottles use real cork, and so mine stuck to the side of the bottle and ripped into pieces, which is why my Grand Marnier is in this small bottle. I don't think that helps. So in the drink without that, I don't really taste the cognac as cognac that much. It's bringing everything a little bit darker, which is why I'm reading the champagne more in the sort of, like I said, yeastier places, the sort of lower, broader notes of the champagne, which is both the cognac in there and I think the reduced dilution. With the Grand Marnier in there, I don't get the orange so much as I now am getting cognac. I'm starting to read that as a key flavor ingredient. So the champagne is playing more to change mouthfeel and to add a bit of brightness into what now is quickly becoming a brandy cocktail. It's still delicious. I would not add the Grand Marnier. I don't think that's doing anything for us. Well, thanks so much for coming along and looking at champagne cocktails this week. It was a quick and easy one because really this is just an old-fashioned. We've covered it before. Just use champagne in your old-fashioned and you've got yourself a champagne cocktail. Do I like it? I do. I think it's a very tasty drink. Is it really better than just having champagne? I don't really think so. I think for my money, I'd be happy to just drink this as is. But I think this is lovely. If you like it, do it. And have fun with it. Try it with a very sweet champagne or very dry champagne, or see how it plays with your other favorite sparkling spirits. Different bitters would be an interesting play, especially less traditional. Like I said, Peychaud's became fairly common for a time, but what if you used some of the more modern, crazy flavored bitters. Would that be a good idea? Maybe, maybe not. Not sure. But thanks for watching this week. Please do all the YouTube stuff, like, share, subscribe, comment, tell your friends, all that good stuff. Watch our other 36, I think, episodes of drinking through the IBA's list here, and visit the blog, shakingandsipping.com. We'll have a write-up on this and each other drink, as well as most weeks, though not this one, because I'm not going to go order this at a bar. We have IBA in real life, where we have a write-up of what happens when I order this drink at a local Seattle cocktail bar. We'll have that back next week. You can follow on Twitter at shaking_sipping. Very infrequent posts, but I'll tell you when we are going to do IBA in real life, that sort of thing. And I'll be back next week with the next drink on the IBA's list. Until then, happy sipping. Cheers.